Our skylines have changed dramatically over the past 3 decades. Huge investment representing the political and economic progress that peace has brought with it. Stretching for more than 300 miles, our borderlands too have changed, today sought out by thousands of tourists who want to experience some of the most spectacular scenery in the world. But it wasn't always like this. Rewind to the 70s and 80s, and the conflict had created huge social deprivation and a lack of investment, a downward spiral that the British government struggled to contain. The historic sharing of the challenge between the Irish government in Dublin and the British government at Westminster brought about the Anglo-Irish Agreement, and with it, the birth of the International Fund for Ireland.
One of the most powerful symbols of reconciliation is here in Derry, Londonderry, where the iconic Peace Bridge connects the east and the west bank of the River Foyle. Helping people to feel comfortable crossing the divide was the challenge for the International Fund for Ireland. And throughout its history, it has successfully navigated political and social challenges, emerging as an impartial force dedicated to the building of new and shared communities. This film will track the history of the fund, the people who helped make it happen, its central role in the peace process, and its relevance today and for the future.
When you think of the background, Northern Ireland had been ravaged by violence and destruction for many, many years. The border counties were certainly economically deprived because of the Troubles. And apart from trying to end the violence, which took a lot longer, I think it was important that people would see that they had better prospects, economic prospects, in the new situation that was arising.
We wanted to bring the maximum resource into helping tackle the problems. Communities which were with real difficulty, divided communities, some with pretty inadequate facilities of one sort and another, trying to help people in a whole range of different ways, and do that by enlisting a lot of international support. And of course, primary among that, the United States, who were outstanding in the support they gave to help tackle the division of communities, the legacy that there was of distrust and hatred that had gone on for far too long, and to bring a better life for a lot of people who we desperately wanted to help.
Enlisting the support of the American president and Capitol Hill triggered the momentum that was needed, and it had bipartisan support. Ronald Reagan, the then president, supported the fund wholeheartedly, and on the Hill, the Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, a prominent Irish American, led the way for the Democrats, helped by the hugely influential Senator Ted Kennedy. Former SDLP leader John Hume, who knew Kennedy well, was also a vital part of the equation. In later years, Democratic Senator George Mitchell became the US administration's peacemaker in Northern Ireland and remains a huge supporter of the fund today.
Physical structures, institutions, non-human entities can be constructed, renovated, replaced. But in the end, it's what people feel, think, and believe that matters. And the International Fund for Ireland has been of great importance in helping reconciliation to take hold among the people of Northern Ireland. After the agreement was reached and before the referendum was held on whether or not to approve it, the government's asked me to meet with individuals and groups of survivors or families of those who'd been killed in the conflict. They were very concerned about some aspects of the agreement. Many of them opposed it. And I talked with them at length about the importance of looking to the future, to trying to take steps that would make less likely that others in future years would have to go through what they were then going through. And that takes help, it takes expert assistance, it takes financial support, and that's the kind of work that the fund is doing, and it is contributing so much to the bringing forward of not only reconciliation, but full, genuine, meaningful, and permanent reconciliation.
Support quickly followed from the European Union, Australia, Canada and New Zealand. On the ground, representation for the fund was key, and one of its most prolific chairmen was Donegal businessman WILLIE McCarter. A graduate of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, WILLIE brought energy to the role and continued to champion the impartiality of the fund to all communities.
The fund started with a clean sheet of paper, and it was a very unique animal because I don't think there had been anything like it before in the world, where an independent board, people drawn from each section of the community, with its own independent budget that was not dependent on either of the governments which had set up the fund.
The IFI is different from other peacebuilding efforts, mainly due to its independent international independence that we've gained over 30 years. We've strong political and financial support from the international community, and that has enabled us to reach parts of the community which have been marginalised and continue to be not marginalised today, who do not find themselves politically motivated. They're politically isolated. They're isolated and marginalised from the peace process. And that enables us, because of that trust that we've built up over 30 years, to engage with those communities, to react to communities' needs and to give them a constructive way to have their opinions heard, to engage in society and hopefully build towards what we all want is, after 30 years, a sustainable peace process.
Most unionists strongly opposed the Anglo-Irish Agreement and distrusted the fund. At the time, their support for anything associated with it was unimaginable. Gradually, as tempers cooled, attitudes changed.
There was great distrust. Of course, many of the unionists, loyalists, hated it at the start, did everything they could to try and block the whole Anglo-Irish Agreement. They boycotted me, they picketed me if I ever went anywhere, British ministers. Although we were ministers of the Crown, which they should have been supporting, we were pilloried, and there was very strong opposition. But gradually people understood this wasn't a sellout, this wasn't a slippery slope to United Ireland.
It probably made it easier for the unionists or the loyalist community who had objections originally when the money and the support was coming from abroad. So I think they saw it then, it was easier for them to accept it. They saw it was going to benefit their communities. So from that point of view, it was easier for us, and it was easier for them, and ultimately it was a win-win.
The Shannon-Earn waterway was a classic example of a strategic investment which could change lives on both sides of the border. The waterway lay abandoned for years, but IFI investment was able to trigger a new flow of people and commerce across the border counties. The impact of the fund was evident in almost 6,000 projects, including landmark facilities like the Northern Ireland Science Park in Belfast, the Rathmore Centre in Derry, Londonderry, Corrymeela Peace Centre in County Antrim, St Patrick's Centre in County Down, and countless enterprise spaces across Northern Ireland and the border counties.
We're in Donegal, and in almost every town and village in Donegal you will find an enterprise facility like the one we're in today, which 20 years later is still vibrant, employing here 20 people. 5 miles down the road and you'll get communities 20, 30, maybe 40 people working in their enterprise facility. So it has been surprisingly sustainable, and that is down to very resilient communities with really good leadership. And the fund has to take credit for having started that process and staying with it for quite some time.
Violence continued throughout the period of the Anglo-Irish Agreement and afterwards, but the prize the communities were promised as a result of a cessation of violence was called the peace dividend. Many people felt that the dividend was irrelevant political rhetoric. The fund had a major challenge to change hearts and minds.
For me, I think the most important were the social projects, because they, in effect, went into the areas that were most impacted by the conflict. And they were the ones that actually were able to work with people who had felt very marginalised by the impact of conflict. And they were able to actually look at what was it that was actually in danger of undermining the peace process? And that was the fact that people very often felt that those that had suffered the most actually weren't getting very much from the peace dividend. The peace dividend was going off to broader society, but actually people living up against peace walls or in various interface areas, whether rural or urban, they weren't seeing very much change on the ground. And I think what was important was that the fund was able to go and talk to those people to see what could make a difference.
As hard as it is to bring conflicts to an end, it is even more difficult to gain full implementation of agreements. It's very, very important that people not turn away once an agreement is reached and think, well, that job's over, let's go on to something else.
Delivering a lasting peace is a slow process. While enormous progress has been made, division and sectarian tensions still have the potential to destabilise society. In response, the fund is concentrating its resources in areas where the political process has been opposed. It has changed education policy so children from different backgrounds can learn together in shared classrooms. Communities have used fund support to resolve complex and long-standing issues like parading and the legacy of the past. Fund efforts are now building the confidence needed for communities to consider unlocking and removing physical divisions or so-called peace walls. The fund is using its unique standing to improve the lives of young people and prevent a new generation from being drawn into violence and destruction.
The independence of the International Fund for Ireland is as relevant today as it was in 1986. The independence that we have gives us flexibility, but more importantly, it gives us independence from political and community intervention.
The fund couldn't have worked without the full backing of the British and Irish governments. And with the Watershed Anglo-Irish Treaty signed, the foundations were laid for real progress. And both administrations saw economic investment as the key to rid the border regions, north and south, of years of stagnation and decay.
Over the years, the relationship between the two governments has continued to strengthen, and today, both recognise the need for the fund to continue with its work.
I think the fund has made a really important and significant contribution in promoting peace and reconciliation, quite often at difficult times and in difficult circumstances over the course of the last 30 years. And I think what's been notable is the preparedness to take some risk, to be able to look at particular projects and see the benefit in bringing communities together and actually having that core agenda. So it has been significant, and I really commend the fund for all of its work over the last 30 years.
I think the fund plays a hugely important role still, even after 30 years. The problems are perhaps not as acute, but the engagement is ever more important because of the fragile political institutions in Northern Ireland, because of the fragility and the sensitivities about relations north and south. I think it's important that the relevance of the fund be applied to the ever-changing circumstances. We've many people in Northern Ireland who are still suffering the trauma, and in some unfortunate circumstances, the still open wounds of the Troubles. It's not only an issue for victims and survivors, but also for wider communities. And in the wider communities, the fund has been particularly active.
It's easy to accept normality as it is today amidst the hustle and bustle of everyday life, watching the hundreds of thousands of people visit the iconic locations and infrastructure in Northern Ireland and the border counties. But we must remember that the fund wasn't created to change the big picture skylines. It was targeted to tackle sectarianism, change attitudes, enable trust and empower confidence. It has done that and continues to do much, much more.